Power creep is both good and necessary for a successful game. So whether you're a button mash hack and slash controller bash, or a meeple moving mastermind of maps, mats, and minis, if you ruffle at the awful riffle shuffle scuffle, or if you're a click clack pick attack number ball luck sack, we're all here for the same reason. I'm Jake. Let's talk games. So first off, what is power creep? Well, it's just the concept that the newer stuff is better than the older stuff. And in a lot of ways, that's always true, but in a game this becomes really relevant, because if the newer stuff is better, then there's no reason to use the older stuff. Right, let's take some examples. In Magic the Gathering, this is old, and this is better. In something like Final Fantasy Brave Exvius, a mobile game, this is old, but this is better. And in something like Guild Wars 2, this is old, and this is actually the exact same gear, because Guild Wars 2 is a game with effectively zero power creep. Now the game creeps in other ways, but power creep isn't as present. So a lot of people dislike this, right? Because power creep not only invalidates your old stuff, but it means that you have to buy new stuff. Now, while that's good for the company, for the consumer, it feels bad to have your gear, characters, cards, dice, whatever, forcefully made obsolete. So, why would I say that power creep is good? Well, let's cover the cons first, and then we'll talk about the pros. And then I want to go even further and discuss how the pros of power creep are absolutely necessary in order for a game to be successful. So let's talk about the cons of power creep. Where do we see these issues? Well, the first is obviously monetary, right? You are forced to keep up and buy more. Buy the latest and greatest. And if you're not, well, you're not going to be very competitive. We see this a lot in trading card games, right? Where the new set that comes out has better cards. And so you're enticed to buy those better cards to improve your deck so you can be competitive. Because the only thing you're playing against is whatever your opponent is willing to buy. And this makes the game feel very pay to win. You see that a lot in mobile games, where people are concerned that if you can just win the game by putting more money into it, the game loses a lot of that feel of being a game. And it feels more like a credit card cash sink for the players. When this becomes especially bad, we see other impacts to the game outside of just old stuff versus new stuff, right? We see games forcibly change the rules of the game itself in order to accommodate new mechanics and new, better units, gear, cards, dice, ships, whatever. And that breaks the game. When something becomes too powerful to even allow the game to function within its base rules, you have done something wrong. This is power creep handled in a very negative way. And we see it a lot. It got so bad in the X-Wing miniatures game that they had to cut off all of their first edition product and remake the rules of the game and re-release the old ships under a second edition banner. And I know this has happened with other tabletop games, but this is the first one that I've really been a part of. I had a fairly large collection. I primarily played Scum, but I had a good amount of Rebels and Empire. And when they released second edition, I felt like they had thrown out my entire collection. I had to rebuy everything. And that just feels bad, right? That takes a whole portion of your fan base and cuts them out of the game entirely. Why then can we say that power creep is actually a good thing? Well, it has a couple of positive effects as well, right? Newer players coming into the game aren't forced to buy a backlog of all of the characters and gear that were good before in order to catch up to what's competitive now. Then you look at a game like Yu-Gi-Oh! That has experienced massive power creep and some of the best cards in the game so good they are banned in every format, like Pot of Greed. You can buy for a nickel. They've reprinted those old cards into the ground and made new cards that are just better. Every generation of cards that comes out in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Game makes those old cards cheaper. And so to be competitive, you have to buy the latest and greatest, but it's really cheap to buy the old cards. So some of those old mechanics that are kicking around and are tier 2, tier 3, you can pick them up and build an entire deck for $20. And so different games handle this power creep in different ways. Magic the Gathering introduces a rotation in their standard environment, where you can only use cards that have come out recently. So you're not forced to buy into these very expensive, very old cards. And part of the reason for that is because they have a very close eye on the power creep of the game, and they try to keep it from really spiraling out of control. Finally, I want to talk about why this is necessary for a game to be successful. And what I mean by that is a game over time to be successful, to continue to be a big player in that gaming environment. There's a lot of games that are released, people enjoy them for a certain amount of time and then set them aside, move on to something else. If you want to hold people's attention, you have to give them something more to work with. You have to advance the story, or the mechanics, or the power level. And that is why power creep is necessary. Nobody wants to watch a show or read a book in which the main character has no arc, stays the same level throughout the entire story. They want to feel like they are progressing along with the game or the story or the mechanics. There is a huge advantage in getting players involved in the game, really latching on to the story or the characters and feeling like they are training those characters towards a goal, reaching that end game. And sometimes that means that they're going to have to set aside their old gear or their old characters and move on to stronger ones. Maybe the new trials coming out simply do not allow for those old characters to be as effective. There's new mechanics that can only be solved by new stuff. And that's where power creep really shines. Because you get to use characters that you would have never gotten an opportunity to if you only sat back on your original characters that you've invested time into and used them throughout the entire game. Even games that don't release new content but have a story arc from start to finish, when you recruit new characters, the ones that you recruit later in the game are generally better than the ones you recruit earlier in the game. And that's just good game design. That's necessary to feel that progression across a game. And it's the same with these games that are ongoing. Years and years down the line, they need to still be releasing new content. New gear, new characters, new cards, new whatever. And in order to do that, they have to keep the game interesting for both new players coming in and players that have been around for years. So I hope this gave you a slightly different perspective on power creep without at least a little bit of the doom and gloom that I frequently see it associated. I'm Jake. It's been really nice talking to you.